Welcome to Linux Saloon, a place to discuss tech, open source, and where Linux is always on tap. Each show will have a talk about a Linux project, such as a distribution of Linux. We've actually done BSD before too. Maybe we should do that again sometime. A desktop environment or application. We also chat about news or any variety of topics from the community. Anything that is Linux, tech, and open source related is on the table for discussion. I'm Nate, a Linux fitness and vintage tech enthusiast with an almost unhealthy obsession with the OpenSUSE project. And with me today, I got White Chocolate, Eris, Jinda, Colin. Ben has finally showed up again. Got Swift 110 and Eric Adams right there at the boop caboose of the whole thing. So not to say you're the butt of any jokes, but how you doing, Eric? Oh, and he disappeared.
I can handle it.
Wait, no, he's back.
What?
You're here. I see it. Swift
okay.
disappeared.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Well, how is everybody?
I moved.
You did.
Excellent.
Good. How are you, Nate?
Fantastic.
You are?
Yeah. I mean, what could I possibly complain about? I mean, it's cold out now. The wind is blowing. The trees are falling over the roads again. It's great. It's everything you ever want for a November weekend.
It just means you get to test all of your winterized systems and see if you're... this isn't your first winter at your new place, is it?
No, it's my second winter.
No. Second winter, okay.
But I can tell you, not that this is not on the docket for discussion, but I can tell you that I did wrap all my hot water pipes. I've got a wrap to put around my water heater, so I'm going to do that. Supposedly, I can extract somewhere between 5 and 9% in increased efficiency. So I don't know if that is true, but I'm definitely going to find out if it is. I mean, actually, it's really hard to measure. I don't know that I can really actually measure that necessarily. I'd have to go like a year or a period of time to really extract the information. I suppose if I were to measure the amount of electricity being used by the water heater over a period of months, I could probably figure it out. But
yeah, probably. But you have to figure there's going to be at least, even if it's a modest savings, your hot water is always being generated, and that trip through cold pipes, you lose so much energy. So you have to imagine that that wrapping them is going to at least offset some of that. So,
right. And since I have an electric water heater and I'm trying to reduce my electric costs as much as possible, it seems like it makes sense.
Is it an instant or is it still a tank?
No, it's a tank.
Okay.
Tank, yep. So I have to wrap that yet. Got a few layers I need to put on there, but I'm gonna put a nice little door so I can get the little door on the side of it, for adjustments or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That sort of thing. On the docket for today, we're gonna be talking about RetroArch. We're gonna check what's on the menu for next week. Do a news flight, our last call. But first, what have you been doing in Linux? Ben, you said you're now a Majaro man. Do the Storm OS people know about this?
Well, actually, it's a bit of a crazy story. I decided that I was originally going to do a calculate spin of Storm OS, but I said, nah, Gen 2 based distros are kind of very niche kind of thing. So I said, what the heck? I'm going to try a Majaro base instead. So I did it. I made my own. What I did was I started out with the typical, Majaro wallpaper, customized the settings, etc. But I didn't have. But when I was all said and done customizing the themes, the etc., I presented it to Matthew Moore and the rest of the guys, and Matt said that Matrix wallpaper, we all felt that, it's not really up to snuff as it should be. So Matt and I talked, and he said, we agreed that he would make me a wallpaper. And so he made 3 of them and showed them all to me, and we picked the second one, and that's where we left it. So
is this ultimately going to be for Storm OS then? You're going to morph it to more like a Majaro base instead of Arch base?
We're not changing bases, no. It's just an alternate option alongside the Debian thing that I was working on. Yeah.
Do you think that you might be putting a little too much on your plate? I mean, it seems like one distribution would be too much. At least for me, anyway. If I had to maintain or even maintain part of one distribution, I would be overwhelmed. I mean, I have a hard enough
Yeah.
time maintaining
I mean,
documentation for OpenSUSE, and it's only like maybe a dozen pages.
yeah. It might, well, 4 ISOs might be a lot on one's plate. So, yeah, I haven't really decided which basis is going to be the long-term goal, but we're probably going to stick to the Arch one and just work it from there. So we will see. So yeah,
Okay.
it's probably going to just be Arch specific, and the other two I might just keep as a personal project and just go from then on.
Well, I will just give you a word of caution. Don't
Yeah,
don't let your eyes get too excited for too many things because it can
yeah, yeah. Because I
end up
don't want to make
piling on you.
too much at once, and that's kind of why I'm probably just going to stick to the Arch basis and just leave it there. Because you're right, I don't want to throw too much into the mix and then go berserk. So, yeah.
For sure.
But yeah,
For
this is just all trial and error right now, just to see how far I can take it, and I don't want to just throw it all into the mix and be like, yeah.
right.
But yeah, that's just some news that I had there. And I do have some words about RetroArch when we get to that segment.
Excellent. I have many words about RetroArch, and they're all very nice words, except for maybe one. All right, but before we get to that, I was going to share a little bit. I have been diligently this week working on several of these projects to make Cubicle Labs something a little bit better. So I was able to, and I think I shared one picture in the Telegram group, but I have installed 3,000-watt inverters for a solar panel array I'm putting on top of this building. So I'm excited about that. And I will say, no part of this project, like in my mind, when I think about like everything all the steps that I'm going to go through to install all these little bits, in my mind, it all seems very simple and pretty straightforward because academically it is this step, then this step, then this step. But the reality is that's not the case at all. It's actually very complex because it's one thing to say run conduit from point A to point B. It's only a short run, but then to actually execute, put in the conduit, and then actually have it so it's all bent in the right way because you're not just bending it one direction, you're actually bending it multiple directions and having to have it line up with something else parallel but offset in two different dimensions is a little bit more time consuming than I thought. So I was hoping to actually have solar panels on this building by this weekend. It's not happening.
Now, what was the single thing the single greatest thing that you underestimated? Like, was there one thing you were like, if I'd planned better for this, then I probably could have gotten that much more done?
I feel like if I understood how to run conduit more smarter, I think that would be better. So
Okay.
I'm using this PVC conduit, this gray stuff. I know you've seen that.
I know exactly what you mean. Yep.
So I'm using that because I think that'd be simpler than bending it. Although I can bend it. I have the tool for that. And maybe bending it would be better. I don't know. So I'm piecing it together. And the thing is, it's like, so I have to go into the wall. And so there's like a thing for that, right? And then from there you can fire it through and then put another thingy on the other side so you can then go directly up, so you can actually access the wires and then redirect them. Well, you can't actually, so you can snake things through, but you can't really actually pull it through because the bends are just too hard. And so it's just, you have to like snake it to one point, then snake it to another point. And so I'm not even done with all that.
So can you like piece it together before you epoxy it or glue it and then sort of pull it off as you need to sort of as you're, feeding it through?
That actually might make it a little bit harder because then
Okay.
I have to fight the conduit itself. If the conduit's at least stationary, then I can pull it from one direction and then go to the other. But then the thing is, like, if you don't pull enough wire to the next part, then you have to go back and you got to pull the wire some more, then pull the wire some more. And probably if I were doing it with another set of hands, it would have been easier.
Yeah. Well, and I guess too, it's going to get easier if, the more you do it, and you're just going to naturally figure those things out. But I do wonder, you asked the question if bending it would be better. And I wonder if a bend would be easier to push the wires through than an angle, because an angle is basically impossible, right?
Well, so the spot I'm thinking directly is like when I'm going through the wall,
Mm-hmm.
I have to be able to, there's an actual component you use to go into like the wall. So you can actually, it's like a little panel you can take off and then you can do whatever you need to do with wires.
Right.
So I like have one, one on one inside of the wall because I'm going directly up and then into it, and then the other one kind of going out. So that it was just a little more complicated.
Isn't it just the oval at the top before the bend goes into the wall, or are you using like a different size, a different gauge?
It's the same size. It's like a.
Because I think of the one. Sorry, I just think of the one for like my air conditioning, for example. At the top of it, so that they can access the wires, there's like a little box with like a rubber seal
Mhm. Yep.
with 4 screws. Is that what you're?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's on the outside face, and then it goes through the wall, and then there's another one on the inside.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
It just makes for
So you,
nothing is as simple as it works out to be in my head.
Gotcha.
so you're still trying to get the wires through the conduit, is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that part's not done. So
I've been told that if you put a bit of string in the conduit and at the other end you put a vacuum cleaner, it'll pull the string through, then you can just tie them on, pull them through. So that's one idea that somebody gave me. Unfortunately, it didn't work for me.
Actually, I got a fish tape, 100-foot long fish tape that I'm using. So I actually have a 50-foot one as well. I need it when I put my air conditioner in here. I needed it for that as well. So I have
one of the flat ones that you can like push and it'll bend. Yeah.
Yep. It's pretty nice. Anyway, so that said, everything's taking longer than I thought it would, and so it just kind of cascades downward. And it is what it is, I guess. All right, Eris, you did another straw poll on how RetroArch is going for everybody. How did that turn out?
Well, 30% said it's going great. 30% said I'm unable to do the exploration. 20% said it is okay. 10% not interested in doing this exploration, and 10% was other. I don't think they replied to me with the other that I remember.
Well, they probably meant
I'm
to
not
say
sure what they
with other is it's super duper fun, and I'm so glad we did it, or something like that. I think. I'm not biased at all.
No, you're definitely right. Absolutely.
So I'm assuming you guys use Flatpak to install this. Is that right? Flatpak.
Yes.
So
I use Flatpak.
I use 3 different methods. I did the packages that are built into OpenSUSE that I can just download, Flatpak, and also the Steam client as well. So you can actually install it via Steam as well.
Yeah, I always forget that Steam has software. It when you look through your your library and it's like there's a software section, and I'm just like, oh yeah. So I never really look into that, but I have used it a couple times, and it's a software delivery system. So hey, guess what? It works.
Yeah.
It's a little surprising they've never actually made more use of that. I mean, I guess maybe how are they doing updates like on Steam Decks and stuff, or is that's probably lower level than Steam itself?
As far as the applications of the games or Flatpak?
Just it's an offshoot. We don't have to talk about it now. I don't know anything very much about the Steam Deck to know whether it's just a Steam interface or whether there is more that you'd be responsible for, like updating all that. So
no, it's Steam OS, but it's packaged or maintained for the Steam Deck. It's got its own stuff behind it, and then on top of it, it runs Steam, but it runs in a particular version of Big Picture mode, and you can try out that beta version. In the new Steam beta, I posted it in the Element or the Matrix channel. You can run Steam via command line. You have to go in and opt into the beta version, and then when you run from terminal, you put the option Gamepad UI, and then it will come up in the Steam Deck UI on your desktop. It's a little buggy. There's some things that are hit and miss on it, but the direction of it looks really good. So if you want to do that thing too.
And I did bring my Steam Deck with me out here, so we can talk about those things if you like. So real quick on RetroArch. It is essentially a front end for emulators, game engines, and media players. It enables you to run classic games on a wide range of computers and consoles through a slick graphical interface. Settings are also unified, so configuration is done once and for all. In addition to this, you're able to run original game discs, like CDs, from RetroArch. RetroArch has advanced features like shaders, netplay, rewinding, next frame, response times, run ahead, machine translation, blind accessibility features, and more. So RetroArch, you can also try it online. It's another option too. You can actually just go right to the website and just try it right there. I don't know about using your library on that. I didn't do it, but it says you can try it right there. So if you want to try it real quick, anybody here on the panel, and see what it's like, you can go ahead and do that. I have been running RetroArch for a little while. I've run on a few different machines. For me, I have it running on my Commodore 64 Imposter machine because it just seems reasonable that I would. And then I have it on my laptop as well as on my Steam Deck. So I've tried it in different ways. And so I can say, it was easy to install for all of them. So I want to start there. So first, the installation or setup process. And so I guess just installation. Did anybody here try the Flatpak? So Jin, did you try the Flatpak?
Yeah, I tried the Flatpak. I also have it on my Raspberry Pi, so it
Okay.
wasn't like I had to try both.
Okay. Did anybody here use this?
Is there a Flatpak for Raspberry Pi?
Maybe. I'm not sure.
I just downloaded the whole entire operating system and ran it as its own thing.
RetroPie.
Okay. RetroPie, okay.
Yeah.
I did that year when I first got my Raspberry Pi. I had a Pi 3B, and it works out really cool. It even had, I don't know what it's like now, but controllers. It's got all the things to automatically set those up too, which is really fun.
Oh, that is cool.
So yeah, the way I ran it was like it was in the Arch ARM repo, so I just installed it directly.
Yeah, they call it Lanka. Lakka, I think.
Oh, Lanka. I just
Lanka,
installed RetroArch directly to the repos. I had to install a couple of other basically extensions. I forgot what those are called. So give me a second. So there are some GUI like extra stuff which you need to install when you install. So it's called RetroArch Assets GLUI, RetroArch Assets Ozone, and RetroArch Assets XMB. So these are basically all the GUI icons and stuff for the RetroArch front end. So basically on Arch-based systems, you need to install these to get the main RetroArch stuff. And what cores did you all try?
A lot of them. But before we run into the cores, because I want to talk about that in just a moment. Was there any other methods besides native packages and Flatpak people used? Anybody here try a Snap? No? Okay. Or the Steam client. Anybody tried the Steam client with?
That was how I did it.
Okay. All right, cool. All right, now as far as the cores are concerned, which cores did you install, Servan?
I tried out mainly the Melon DS core, which basically runs the Nintendo DS. So I'm playing Pokemon Platinum, so that's a DS game. I also installed Citra, but I haven't tried it. That's the Nintendo 3DS. But I have used Citra as a standalone app before. It didn't work that well, but I will try it after I complete the game, which I'm playing right now. I'll probably try a Nintendo 3DS game on Citra. So one thing which I observed was most of these cores are already existing emulators, which people have like repackaged for RetroArch.
Right.
So Melon DS is an existing emulator. So for Nintendo Game Boy Advance, there's MGBA, which I've used like 15 years ago. I remember, but now it's like a core for RetroArch.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, I use the Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Game Boy Color, which I guess are the same things. That's MGBA for that. And also Game Boy Advance. I think that's also MGBA, actually. And then the PSP one, which is I don't remember what it's called, like PPSSSP,
That sounds correct.
PPSSPP, PPSSPP. Yeah. So it's a bunch of
Wait,
P's
let
and
me
S's.
check. PSP. There are several PlayStation cores for some reason. So many of them.
And I also tried the Commodore 64 core, which just uses Vice. So it just kind of plugs into that. So I think it's very smart they use existing projects to plug into, because what's the advantage of writing your own when you can just leverage another open source project and incorporate it as part of the other one? I think that's very cool.
Yeah, I agree, because whenever new changes and improvements are brought in those original projects, like sometime in the future they'll be patched. So that's a good thing because it improves the emulator support gradually.
Right, exactly. Because I mean, there's still new developments happening in the Commodore 64 world, and so Vice just got another update recently. So you think a 40-year-old computer would be pretty much all done by now. Now the one thing I will say about the Steam version of RetroArch is that it will synchronize all your save games between all the different computers that you have Steam on, which I think is very handy. I don't know if it'll synchronize the games themselves. I
mean, the way it normally works is if you have Steam on multiple computers, you can, depending on the systems themselves, you have access to the games, and then if there's a game on another system, sometimes you can stream it. But I don't think it like automatically installs your games anywhere. But it does, like you said, the cloud save, which is it is very, very handy. Yeah.
So that is one really handy thing. So if for whatever reason I am playing something back here because I just need to like reset my mind for a moment, I can pick up where I was playing on RetroArch on the Steam client, and whatever I was playing on the Steam Deck, play it back here, and then went back to the Steam Deck. That progress is saved, and I think that's a pretty cool feature.
What else is a cool feature is that I can sit here and play Sonic the Hedgehog 2 while listening to you guys. Love it. It's like that was my first game system other than that was my first personal console was the Sega Genesis, the Gen 2, and it was great. So this has been a good week for me.
Did anybody change the default? Like this is the interface here that I'm using. Did anybody try a different interface? Apparently you can.
So
you did, Ujinda?
Yeah, it's just the one that looked more like Lanka because I was more used to that for some reason. That was one of the things about this. There's so many settings in it, and there's so much stuff to learn. I mean, like some of the ones like RetroPie and stuff, I thought were a little more intuitive, but this one is not as much, but way more powerful, which I think that's usually goes hand in hand. But it ran very well, and I think it's quicker and faster and speedier if you sit there and futz with all the little settings. That makes sense.
What systems did you emulate?
I did DOS, something DOS. I did GameCube. I did Nintendo 64, and I did another one. I'm trying to remember which one it was. I did PSP.
Okay, and they all ran pretty well.
Yeah, they all ran great. It took a lot longer to want to set up the keyboard though to get it to work with the keyboard for some reason on some of them, more so than I thought it would. But yeah, everything ran great. But like I said, I had to I watched a video on how to learn how to set it up because there's a big can of worms there. I mean, like if you wanted to just play, say, I don't know, the GameCube games, you could download Dolphin and probably figure out how to set it up in probably 10 minutes. But this one took a little longer. But maybe it's just me.
Oh, well, probably not just you.
Okay.
I mean, someone did a video for it for a reason, right?
Yeah. Well, the videos were, right. The videos were interesting. I mean, like the one guy's was very in depth, and I went to a couple of different ones and try to see what I could learn. And there is a big can of worms. It's
well, if you have any videos you want to share that you looked at,
I'll see if I can find the one I watched. That was really good.
Servan, I see that hand raised.
There's something called the desktop mode. Have you tried?
I did not.
So in the main RetroArch menu, if you just open RetroArch, it will show you something called below load core and load content. It will show something called show desktop menu. Apparently, I haven't explored it that much, but I'm playing this on the Raspberry Pi.
Mhm.
So it seems if you use the normal RetroArch like GUI, it limits your FPS to your monitor's refresh rate. So my monitor is 60 hertz. So I tried to get speed up working because I'm playing Pokemon. I don't want to play at 60 FPS. And it didn't work that properly because it was forcing the sync. So apparently, if you somehow configure it in the desktop menu and launch the game that way, you can force a higher FPS. So have you guys observed the FPS when you were playing? Like, it seems if you use normal RetroArch, it forces you to the monitor refresh rate FPS.
I didn't play with that myself. Did anybody here play with the refresh rates? No.
I tried hard. Like, I spent maybe like hour or 2 hours trying to get that to work, and I just gave up.
Here's something I did notice. So when playing Pokemon Fire Red on the Steam Deck, I expected the background to move like at the pixel pace that of its native resolution of the game. You know what I mean? Like I expected a certain kind of like the pixel should move at the rate of the pixels. Does that make any sense? What I'm saying here? Like they right, but for whatever reason, somehow in RetroArch, it seems like it was moving a lot smoother than that. Like it was shifting like when you as you're walking, whatever. The screen was scrolling way smoother than what it ever did when I've ever played on a Game Boy Advance. So I don't know what's going on there. That's probably an MGBA thing. Probably some sort of like, who knows, using some sort of crazy AI thing. I don't know. But the experience I found was a lot better than on the old hardware. And
do you know why it isn't it?
Why?
Whatever device you're using has a better GPU than the stupid Game Boy Advance.
Well, yeah, but what I'm saying though is,
yeah,
it should move at whatever, if it's a 320 by 200 resolution or whatever it is, it should shift. Every pixel, it's going to shift at that pixel distance, but the pixels are shifting at less than that, at a much higher refresh rate, so everything feels a lot smoother.
I think it's just the refresh rate.
There's got to be something else going on there because the way it's interpreting the pixels and whatnot. Maybe Adam knows. He seems like Adam would have an answer for me because he seems to know everything about gaming.
Well, there's a similar thing with the Genesis and Sonic the Hedgehog. That's the one of the things about the original hardware of some of these systems is that, well, I guess I can speak for the Genesis. I'm kind of a nerd in that realm. It was an arcade box that was scaled down, and unlike our current processors that we have now, these older systems used crystals for their clocks.
Mm-hmm.
And the crystal for the Sega Genesis, I can't remember the hertz for it, but you could actually overclock the original Sega Genesis by changing that crystal out. Now, how this plays out in Sonic the Hedgehog is, say, the whole core game loop is run through the level in less than 10 minutes and grab as many rings as you can. Well, when you get hit without a shield or something, you lose all those rings. And when those rings go out on the screen, it would cause the frame rate to tank on the Genesis. You don't have that in emulation because it has the ability to run it. And if you overclocked it and you put a new crystal on the original motherboard of the Sega Genesis, you could get that. You could get that nice smooth gameplay like that. Now it's kind of locked. The Genesis is a really more of a rigid system, but you wouldn't have that issue.
So is that something that you see in emulators, that the original game could potentially be smoother because you can, I guess, overclock it?
Yeah. There's another thing that I think you guys might know more if you played Skyrim or any of Bethesda's games, where you had, if you went in and you tried to fiddle with the frame rates. Those games are pretty locked. But if you mess with the frame rate on those games, for some reason, the physics system is somehow, for some odd reason, tied to it, and you would get really crazy physics. Well, in these older systems, that clock rate would actually run the speed of the game. So it wouldn't just be like, oh, it's smoother. It's like the game just ran faster. Everything about it, and it would just. So when you have in emulation, some of the fast forward, like I also played Pokemon Red for a little bit, through like the first couple towns on RetroArch. You can use like on my PS4 controller. I found that if you use the analog sticks, I believe it's the analog sticks or the triggers, you could make the game run at bazillions of like times faster. And so when you would walk in any of the 4 directions, the game would just fast forward and go. You would instantly be across the field. Yeah. So you would still run into like the random encounters of Pokemon popping up in the grass or wherever you were, but that actually made grinding Pokemon faster instead of just, come on, I need another Spearow I can beat up on. Where's the Weedle? I can just hold that button and go into a corner where there's grass and just next Pokemon, next Pokemon. That would be it.
Sure.
So like some of these older systems in emulation, they don't translate like how we think of modern games. But the GBA, that's what you were playing that on, right? That might have a more modern chipset and graphics setup on it where maybe it was one of those things where the game could technically run at a better frame rate and those things. And maybe the way the graphics are, because a lot of times you'll also see the parallax system where you'll have backgrounds and foregrounds. I think the GBA had 3D capabilities in it, right? So a lot of these 2D games have 2-dimensional assets on 3-dimensional or 2.5-dimensional, layouts. So you'll have some emulators, you have scaling issues where you'll just have funky, weird textures, or you won't have transparency around the characters or the elements on the screen. So you might be noticing some of that, like it's a little alien to you. It's like, oh, why does it move that way?
Yeah, it could be. But I was just, I just looked at it again just now and seeing how it appears like there's some kind of a blending going on or something where it's
called it's called interpolation. Do you notice if the background shimmers at all when you move?
Let me look.
There's like a shimmering to it.
It's not. I wouldn't say it's a shimmering. It's just very, very smooth. It's just weird.
There's also the issue of frame skipping. Do you hear any like audio crackling, or does the music sound fast?
Nope. It's pretty spot on.
So there's usually a setting to allow the game to sync to audio, and so it'll sync the frame rate of the game to the audio buffer. You can check and see if that's there.
Now, there's no way you're gonna be able to see it through here.
Nope.
But the way it's scrolling, it's not scrolling by pixel. It's scrolling like less than a pixel in distance when you go back and forth. So I don't know how that's happening, but it is. It's doing something weird. I mean, it's nice. It's a welcome weird because it makes it feel like a more purposeful game.
Actually, that brings up a good point that emulation is not always accurate, right? And that there are certain emulators like Hegon and others that try their best to be as accurate as possible, but they end up being very resource intensive in the process. But a lot of the high level emulators like MGBA or ZSNES, SNES 9X, those like kind of higher level emulators, they don't really strive for accuracy in so much as they strive for performance, right? Not necessarily like super high frame rates, but that anything can run it kind of thing. And so you'll find a lot of times audio doesn't sound quite right, frame rates don't sync up properly, character sprites might have various issues, and then in 3D games some texture corruption might happen. But it's kind of the part of like RetroArch in general is RetroArch almost all
the emulator, of the cores, or however you want to call them, on there are high-level emulators, and they will have degrees of inaccuracy to them, and that's probably one of them.
Well, it is a good inaccuracy because it's. I would say I think I said this like 17 times already, but it feels more modern, I guess. It doesn't feel like an old game. It feels like it's a new game that's meant to look old as opposed to just an old game.
Yeah.
Does playing it on a non-CRT display have any effect on this? Like, I wonder, because I grew up playing my Sega consoles on CRT televisions. I guess it technically wouldn't matter from like the the number of lines and all that sort of stuff, but visually there was something about that sort of way the edges sort of dropped back. I don't know. It's been so long that I played a console. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of things to consider when it comes to playing on an LCD versus a CRT. The main one being input latency, because the display itself has a certain amount of latency to it, and that can add to it. Any kind of scaling that has to be done. So like on a lot of TVs, they do their own scaling, for example. So if you're not running at the native resolution of the TV and you're not running in game mode, then it'll do its own scaling, and that can add additional like frames of latency to it. Also aspect ratios. So some of the machines had like some weird aspect ratios, like Super Nintendo. A lot of games were like 8:7 aspect ratio, like a really weird, like kind of rectangle-y thing.
Yeah.
And that was fine on the CRT because the geometry of a CRT wasn't locked to specific pixels, right? It was a line thing and all that. But on an LCD, you can find that weird things happen, like a shimmering scrolling or some kind of like weird. It basically comes from the interpolation that needs to be done. So if it's not pixel perfect in terms of an integer scale for that game, then like if you resize the window to something that's not an exact like 1, 2, 3, 4 whatever scale of the game, you can get like weird shimmery stuff when you scroll. You can get like characters and stuff that look either too wide or too tall or stuff like that. But yeah, that's the main issue is with like aspect ratio and pixel response.
It kind of makes, in a larger sense, sorry, that it like I have, let's say, videos from 20 years ago, and when I play them, they're either so low resolution that they're not worth watching, or it's hard to play them because the codec or some weird thing, and it's like the further we get away from the initial application of this technology, like the harder it becomes to reproduce, because the hardware's moved on, and we're not using a CRT anymore. We're not using these types of components anymore, and so you can reproduce it on the newer screens and the newer processors and yada yada, but you don't really recreate fully that initial that actual like experience. And so there is, like, I wonder if you would be able to tell the difference in any meaningful way between sitting with the Super Nintendo hooked up to a television versus going through one of these emulators. Like,
most definitely you would. As somebody who uses real hardware connected through an external scaler connected to my 65-inch TV, yeah, it's a big difference between that and an emulator. Almost always the big thing is audio. Emulators struggle so much with getting audio right. And like you can play the same game in like ZSNES, SNES 9X, BSNES, and Hegon, and they'll all sound different.
Interesting.
And then you play it on an actual Super Nintendo, and the only one that's even close is Hegon.
I like this SNES 9X one. That one I found my overall, like with my library of games, which I think it's around 600 or so, is the only one that plays the ones that I care about very well.
Yes, SNES 9X does play well. SNES 9X's audio emulation's really bad.
These old systems have, some of them even had really nice sound chips in them. Even the old Commodore. The Commodores had what's called a SID.
Yep.
And it's a really at one point it was a popular thing to make what's called a SID station, where you would use multiple SID chips to create a polyphonic synthesizer. One of my favorite bands that's also a gamer band that is called Machine Supremacy. The machine is spelled with an AE characters at the end of machine. But they did the soundtrack. They did soundtrack for Jetson Guns 2, Bionic Commando, and they've got their keyboard player. It's metal, like they're a Swedish band, but or like rock metal with video games, synthesizers, and it sounds like you're in an arcade. It is super cool. And the Genesis has a Yamaha sound chip that was really popular. It wasn't the exact same Yamaha chip that was in the keyboards that were being sold at the time. Little fun fact: Michael Jackson started working on the soundtrack to Sonic the Hedgehog 3. There's some bunch of videos you can go find about it. The reason he bailed on it was because the sound chip in the Sega Genesis wasn't perfect. He knew the keyboards that he used. He knew the synthesizer, all the things and stuff to make the sounds he wanted, but because he was one of those kind of creatives, they had a falling out with the sound design team. But you can go watch videos on it. You can see the comparison between some of his album stuff and what's in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. And there's a whole big thing about the sound reproduction and the soundtracks in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. The original, if you just go get a Sega Genesis, sounds great. But then all the re-releases later, it's actually worse than like say Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, where they changed like half the tracks when they did the re-release. It's actually that they just don't sound good. There were PC releases, there's re-releases on mobile, and there's re-releases that are in all the Sega Genesis collections that are on the Xbox and PlayStation and whatnot, and on Steam. And the soundtracks, all of them they all sound different, even there. So it's not just a difference between emulation and as we're talking about and the original hardware. It's porting it to anything. But
For sure.
I'm playing with the Gen. The GX module on here, and it sounds great. Like that's a pretty easy sound chip to emulate, that Yamaha, because it was so ubiquitous. But the other really cool thing, and if I can find it, I think someone built a cartridge for the Genesis to be able to hook into it and make a synthesizer out of the Genesis, the Sega Genesis.
Like MIDI? Like use as
like a MIDI, like remember like Mario Paint, you could go in and do all the things. Like I think there's someone made a cartridge, because you can still get them and write them if you can find the hardware to do that. And there are a couple sound generator plugins out there that emulate the Sega Genesis, so you can get that if you want to do music with it. It's neat.
So there's speaking of the Genesis audio, there's a project called MD4EA. I can type it in the chat, but it's a project to try to map out the sound profile of various systems. It started with the Genesis, and they've done others as well. But the idea was to try to accurately kind of map the sound of all because each Genesis, there's a bunch of different revisions, and they all sound slightly different. A Model 1 Genesis sounds very different from a Model 2, but even within Model 1s and Model 2s, different ones sound different. And so they wanted to collect the way the sounds come out of these, so that if you do emulation, if you do FPGAs or any kind of recreations, you want to make sure you get the accurate sound. And that's a project that's been doing that.
Yeah, and it was based on the different revisions of the Yamaha sound chips that were available. That's all that was.
Before it runs off too long, so Sean Gold, it says the Commodore was also using an analog sound chip, which is why they're so hard to emulate, and it's true. And also,
they're awesome.
the different revisions of the SID chip sound differently too. And the early ones were more inclined to burn out, but some say the sound was better on the earlier ones than they were on the later ones. But there's some sort of analog digital conversion thing that they were doing in there as well. There's all kinds of magic sauce that they had running in the SID chip. And
Yeah,
also, I want to say the coolest application I've seen for a SID chip was shared to me the other night by one Eric Adams on Telegram. Did you want to talk about this, Eric? Or all right, so a guy took two Commodore 64s and a bunch of 5 1/4 floppies and created a SID organ, Commodore 64 organ, accordion out of it. And so it would play like an accordion, and it would like it had like these other modules in there, so it would adjust like the volume based on how much air is flowing out of it and everything else too. But it was an absolutely amazing contraption that this guy built, and
I literally couldn't believe it. Like I was, it looks like the type of thing that, you just sort of imagine, but there's no way you could pull it off. And yeah, I think he was German, if I had to guess. But like he just, I mean, the one, and it's just the one hand's hitting the keys, and it's, and it is. He's actually, moving it in and out, and unbelievable. And it sounds pretty good too, I thought.
I put the link in the chat, but yeah, actually, it sounded really good. And the way he programmed the keyboards to act was like an accordion too. And then also he did like a rhythm generator on I guess to be like the bass side of the accordion. And so I mean, all these things that he did, it was just absolutely amazing. And I could never play the thing, but he played it so well. It was just, I mean, the guy's obviously a phenomenally intelligent musician. So it's pretty cool.
Plus, he plays the music before the intro.
Yeah, he does.
Right, you don't have to sit through the whole thing.
So, Colin, you had your hand raised up a little while ago, and then I so rudely ignored you.
No. I got a phone call and I took it off.
Oh,
so I installed this RetroArch.
Mhm.
So what next?
Well,
I've just got this menu screen here. What do I do?
So the easiest thing would be to, however you would like to do that, and I can't make any suggestions. I have lots of physical media and ways of pulling the images off of the cartridges themselves. Not everybody can do that.
So you need the actual game. Oh.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay.
That's not what I'm saying.
I actually found a game, a homebrew, in case anybody's interested. It's called Dottie Dreads Not. And it's like a platformer, but you're like a witch, and there's like little monsters you go around, and then it's a little bit of puzzles every now and then. So in case you're interested,
that's right.
It's for the Super
That's
Nintendo.
cool.
So
I just thought.
If there's
Colin,
sorry, Aris.
No, I was going to say, Colin, this is why every time I've gone to play with an emulator, there are ways to get ROMs and all of the sort of the image files of the cartridges or discs or whatever it is that that console system used. But if you don't have your own, then you're sort of going out and finding them, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Archive.org has a lot of stuff archived there. And if you would like to peruse archive.org and for academic purposes, play around.
I think I may actually try RetroArch simply because I have had such a hard time on other systems. Like you, Colin, you get it installed and then you've just got this screen.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, what do I do
I
now?
I thought it had games in it. That's why I thought I'll install it while you're all talking. And then I got to the screen. I might have some Game Boy games that are from a long way back. I don't know if I've still got them, but you remember the little Game Boy thing?
Mm-hmm.
I think I had some games for that. So I might check it out. Maybe. So there we go. I'm not a gamer much. So
yeah, so there are ways of getting ROMs out there. There's a lot of abandonware sites too. A lot of games are just considered abandonware. Nobody has any claim on them or stakes any current claim on them.
You should be careful though. The one ROM website I went to get a backup of Sonic 2, which I still have my original cartridge, so it's technically legal. Your ISP doesn't know that you have a 1992 version of that cartridge, and they might send you a letter. So a VPN is a good idea in case you have issues with that wherever you're at. They did send us a letter once when I went to Pirate Bay to find some things that were hard to find.
Really?
And they did not like that. Yes.
Who's your
I
provider?
was like, Spectrum.
Hmm.
So if you run Spectrum, if you download anything through Pirate Bay, I highly suggest you, at the very least, Cloudflare, your DNS things, and all of that, and whatnot. So just be mindful.
That's good.
It might be legal, but for you, but they don't take chances a lot of times. Now, nothing happened. It was like a warning letter, like, don't do that. So it was like, okay, kept paying my bill, kept having internet.
Yeah, that should be noted that there's some legal ambiguity around downloading ROMs. So, consult a legal
Sounds like
professional,
fun.
I suppose.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah, it could be.
VPN is your best friend.
Yeah, they're definitely a layer of security, I guess you could say.
You should practice safe search.
Yep. And be very careful from that point forward. Okay.
So if I don't know if anybody saw this, but Veronica Explains, a YouTuber for some Linux
Yep.
content. She made a video where she played Mario, the first one, Mario 1, with Vim keys.
Oh, yeah,
to
yeah.
control him. So she says that she actually pulled the ROM from her own cartridge, and that's how she played it. So it is doable, but you would need the hardware to actually like be able to connect your game to the computer so you can dump the ROM that way. I'll post the link in case anybody's interested.
I don't have any ROM dumpers for cartridges, but I do use my PS3 to rip my PS3 games, or my Wii and Wii U to rip those games and stuff. So GameCube as well. So like if the discs at the optical drive systems are a little easier, because if you can do the homebrew stuff on the machine itself, it's a lot easier to rip the disc that way. But yeah, with cartridges, you have to get some special hardware for that usually.
I got this really cool device. It's called an Epilogue, I think is what it is. I have yet to do a write-up on this on cubiclenet.com. Still playing with it, but you can play games directly from your computer off of the cartridge, or you can pull the ROM down, or you can play on MGBA or whatever, like your Game Boy game, and you can take that save file and export it into the cartridge that you've had. There's all kinds of fun different ways you can interact with cartridges these days, kind of making it a lot easier to enjoy these old video games.
It's really all about preservation at the end of the day,
I think so.
because you want to keep this stuff around. You want to document it well. You want to make sure that it's there in perpetuity, right? And of course, modern gaming eschews that with online stuff and whatever. But like, that's the idea. And some people are like, oh, well, you're just like trying to pirate things or whatever. And it's like, it's not necessarily about that. It's about, preserving these things, because we think of the most common stuff, oh, here's a Mario, here's a Sonic, those kind of things. But there are games that people discover all over the place. A game, it might be a total crap game, but it doesn't mean it's not worthy of being preserved, right? It's something somebody might find at like a random flea market that's like a Brazilian version of Blaster Master with like, I don't know, some weird character, and like that's worthy of being preserved. And that's the key part of all these efforts, is to make sure that these are playable for people into the future. And accuracy is definitely a nice thing to have. Like, sure, when you're playing, like you were saying with your game earlier, like sometimes it's nicer to play at higher frame rates or smoother scrolling and things like that. But the key to the effort is to preserve them as they were, and that's the main goal. And anything above that is just icing.
Mm-hmm. That's actually one of the things I think is at risk with some of these copyrights and these takedowns and whatnot, are whether or not we're actually preserving this art form, for the long term. Because I know I've said this probably ad nauseum at this point, but I truly think that video games are an art form, and they are an art form that I think should be enjoyed in different ways too. I mean, whether it's just looking at it or sharing it with like your kids or nephews, nieces, stuff like that. But there's something to be said, like to see where video games have come from and where they're going, and how in many ways, the old video games, they concentrate a lot more, I think, on actual skill, as far as I'm thinking like the old Nintendo games, the term Nintendo hard. Does anybody know that term? Where this game is like
Yeah,
Castlevania.
NES hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said about the how things have changed, because like today you get like unlimited continues and everything else or whatever. You can just keep plugging your way through the game, which is also kind of great too. But it's just something to think about. The how they've changed, I think, is also very interesting. And
The power of nostalgia too when it comes to this stuff. I mean, I'm almost 50, and like I was a Sega Master System kid and then a Sega Genesis kid, and like I just looked up. Dawn had mentioned that Steam sells Sega released I guess an emulator with a bunch of games from the I don't know, maybe the Genesis, maybe the Master System. Anyway, I was looking at it on Steam and it showed Altered Beast. I haven't thought of Altered Beast in 30 years.
Have you played Altered Beast in the arcade though?
Yes.
That was awesome.
And so like I had that game and played it to death when I was a kid. And just seeing the picture of it, just like it all just like came back, just that quickly. I can hear the sounds, I can hear the music. Like it's amazing how much nostalgia there is for that. But it's always like that. Should you go back and relive it? Like if I played it now, all of these memories that I have in my head, would I enjoy it as much as I did then? And I just no way I could possibly enjoy it as much as I could when I was 12 years old, sitting there playing it in my bedroom. So
the thing about nostalgia and old games for most people is it's not even about the game. It's about the people you enjoyed the game with, the time in your life, the things that were going on around it, the person you were at the time, your parents, your siblings, or whoever. Like it's less really about the game, and it's more about bringing you back to that time. And for some people that works, and then for other people they're like, well, I thought about that time, but then when I look at this game, the graphics are terrible, the controls are weird, like
Right,
it's super
right.
hard. Like, maybe my childhood wasn't so great, right? And kind of
Right.
kind of look at it that way. But
Well, I know
I
I
feel
look
like that's most of what it is.
Yeah, I think you're right. Because I mean, I know when I look at like the old Atari games, that when I was a littler kid, 7, 8, 9 years old, and I didn't have the Atari system, so I'd go to a friend's house and he had it. And I just remember thinking it was the most incredible thing in the world. And then I look at videos or screenshots of it now, and I'm just like, there's like some random shapes on the screen and like 3 colors. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Atari always was, but yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's the other thing. Although I would say that if you are a parent of small children, you can sort of do the same through your kids, right? So you can see them experience it for the first time and see them enjoying it just as you would have at the same time, right? And
I have a kind of a funny story on that. So there's this game that I played as a kid a lot on the Commodore 64 called Racing Destruction Set. And the neat thing about the game was you could race these tracks, but you could also adjust like the gravity. So if you went off a ramp, if you have the gravity set to moon, you're off the screen for quite a while, and then you come crashing down. If you have it on like an Earth gravity, the car obviously reacts differently. And I played this on my C64, the C64. That has like it's basically an emulator Commodore 64 with working keyboard, but has USB and HDMI as opposed to the original ports. But I played a lot as a kid. You can make your own tracks. You can do all kinds of fun things. You have different vehicles. You can kind of customize them a little bit. And I thought I'd show it to my kids to play. My oldest, he thought it was a lot of fun. He made all kinds of tracks and with the construction set thing. And the way he explored the game was incredibly different than the way I explored the game. And I don't know if it's because the load times are so unbearably long on the Commodore 64 that I didn't have the patience to try the different things he did, or what. But So when I played the game, I wanted to always race the fastest cars, fly the car as high as I can, do all these things. And he built all these tracks to like work with these like pickup truck and Baja Bug stuff. And so my preferred vehicle just wouldn't work on his tracks that he made. And actually, it was like I had a whole new appreciation for the game in a very different way than how I did as a kid, just because he explored it differently than I did, and got many hours of play out of I guess a 30, how long ago was 1985, 30-year-old game, and
Yeah.
and so it was really interesting to see. And I think the game in some ways holds up really well even now because of that construction factor, and the graphics are obviously 320 by 200 pixels, so not a whole lot you're working with there, but I think they do it pretty well.
Yeah, replayability, it is amazing. Certain games, and you're right, different people approach them differently. But the idea that there was so little information on these cartridges or whatever, and the fact that you could spend so much time like teasing out every little piece of like what's fun and what's interesting and what can I do, and it would seem to be so limited, but somehow there was always that one extra thing to try, or try it this way, or so that's interesting that he had a different take on it, and you had a different appreciation. I think that's probably true of a lot of things. I'm sure there were games I played that I wasn't interested in that someone else looked at and found some interesting thing to do that I didn't. So it's interesting then that there is sort of this rebirth of, I guess would you say that emulators then, something like RetroArch, is catering to nostalgia specifically, or is this younger people discovering these older games and it's a history, like a historical thing where, oh, these games are fun to play, or at least it's interesting to see where gaming came from, or like what do you think is driving these types of systems from being made?
I think it's a
I think
combination of things.
high level emulators like these are definitely efforts to get a good enough preservation thing, but also they do serve that market of sort of the quick hit of nostalgia. And it's not just a matter of like open source things like RetroArch. I mean, like Nintendo and others have definitely used emulators in their own stuff. But like it's really like I think that's the biggest market it serves, is like the people who are like, oh yeah, I remember the Mega Drive or whatever. I'll play that, and then they get their quick, they download their 1,000 ROM pack and they only play about 3, and then they move on, right? And then it makes sense, right? Because like what's the upfront cost, right? You already have a PC. I mean, even the most like dinky PC today can emulate most things, right?
But
most of the older stuff.
You touched on something there that I didn't even. You said it twice now, and I wasn't really paying attention. So, the idea that preserving these pieces of software because the systems that ran them and the interest in them has waned by and large from just like society in general. Mm-hmm. So without someone being interested in preserving them, like they would just disappear. So you think, I don't know anybody behind RetroArch or any of these other emulators, but do you feel like that's like the genuine impetus for like this, we've got to do this or else they're just going to not be there anymore?
Yeah, there's a huge avenue for preservation and all that. And these emulators are not necessarily, most of these emulators are not necessarily concerned with the accuracy, right? They're not trying. So if you take something like Hegon, that emulator is very rough to run on most machines because it is a cycle accurate emulator of a Super Nintendo. So it's not just trying to like, so when you think of an emulator like a HLE, high level emulator, those are using modern computer like instructions to get a simulacra of the hardware, right? So like I can do these things in DirectX or in OpenGL or something like that to get like something approximating a PS1 as close as I can. It will never be exactly a PS1 or exactly a SNES or whatever, right? But then you have emulators like Hegon who are entirely software based, and instead of trying to use modern instructions to emulate the old system, it tries to use the original instructions through modern ways. So sort of the backwards of that, meaning that instead of trying to make an approximation of the machine, is trying to make your machine be that machine, right? And so there's a lot. That's why it performs way different than the others, right? But I think most of these like high level emulators exist because they allow the barrier to entry for all of this old stuff, right? Think of it as like there's this really awesome pieces of art in a gallery, but you have to be like some aristocracy and like some high level person in society to ever be able to experience them, right? If you look at it from that perspective, something like if you only could use the original hardware, then like a TurboGrafx 16 is something people will never get a chance to play, right?
Right.
You know, Saturn's extremely expensive. Like these other things that are hard to get are really expensive. Then like most people would just never be able to experience them in any way. And these emulators provide a way to kind of democratize the experience of these old games. If you want to buy the original hardware, you want to buy the CRT, you want to get a scaler, you want to like go the whole way and like with all the original stuff, you can. But if that's beyond your means, here's a way that you can still experience these games and this art in a much easier package.
Yeah, for
You're
sure.
muted, Eric.
I think a lot of people are going to approach it from a casual perspective. I mean, I know myself, like I have that nostalgia, and it's something that would be maybe interesting to me. But there's no way I'm going to spend a lot of time or money, invest those things to be able to recreate that. So that's something like RetroArch might benefit me because of that. Real quick, I think Swift, were you going to say something?
So in my apartment here, in fact, a few feet from where my tablet is that I'm on right now, I have my original Super Nintendo from 1992. And somehow I picked up another SNES. I don't know when. I don't know. I just know I have two Super Nintendos. Neither one of them works, by the way, for whatever reason. I do have the games. I got all my games. So whether you're talking about Monopoly, Super Mario World, they used to come with it. I got those. For me, as was mentioned, I'm not willing to invest in this stuff that's at this point like 30 years old, because time moves on. It's, I will sometimes maybe want to have a desire to play the game, but I'm glad to have it in a form, where it's on an emulator, on a ROM. We was doing this in high school on the computers in accounting class, for crying out loud. You get your ZS and you get your SNES 9X. I'm in there playing Super Mario World, Super Mario All-Stars, and the kids think I'm some kind of technological genius. It's fun. I mean, that was still like early 2000s. So yeah, it was closer to when these games were current. But now we're so far and beyond. I don't see it really being something that someone who is new or younger is going to have too much interest in. If you got a little kid, and you introduce them to it, sure. I promise, I'm pretty sure you'll get more mileage out of that. But for a teenager or somebody that's already used to a PS5 or whatever's out by this point, then I don't care about no 8-bit game. Yep. So that's just kind of where we are now. We're so many years separated from those games that you're going to largely serve an audience that is nostalgia. And you may have a few folks that are new come in, but I don't see them being all that much, to be honest.
Yeah, gotcha. I don't expect anyone to do what I do. Like I get the original hardware, the original games, the controllers. I have a RetroTink 5X. It's like a $300 scaler that just takes in analog inputs and puts them on the TV. Like I don't expect anybody to do that.
Yeah.
But it's awesome when you do.
For sure. Colin.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, if anybody knows where to get Space Invaders from, I'll invest time with that, because I reckon I paid the developers 5 times over with the amount of money I spent on that machine.
Google or DuckDuckGo or something. I'm sure you can get it. I know I have the Atari version of that. I know about the arcade version. I don't have that one.
Yeah, it's a great game.
I found another way to install RetroArch just a moment ago.
Oh,
Xbox. If you put your Xbox in developer mode and point your web browser to a GitHub page, you can install a third-party app store and emulators. I dropped a link in the chat.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, I did that on my Series X. It's pretty neat.
I didn't think that there was a homebrew way to do things on the Xbox like that. and that you could even attempt to go into a developer mode on a retail box.
Yeah,
But
what's interesting is they did that because they knew somebody was going to crack it and somebody was going to do it. So if they had a sort of sanctioned proper way to do it, then they wouldn't have to worry about people getting their signing keys like happened with Sony and all of that. So this was kind of Microsoft getting ahead of all of that by just
Good for
instead
them.
of being a butt, just like, hey, here's how you can get to it.
That's neat. I wonder if anybody's tried to use that and exploit to get farther into the system.
I'm not sure. It's pretty sandboxed away, but yeah.
But still, it's nice that they give us like, here's your little corner to do your thing. You can't play all of your other games right now. You got to reboot your system first and go back to retail mode, but do it right here.
Yeah, the great thing is like you can opt to, because they operate as like two different environments, so you don't have to like wipe dev mode when you switch back to retail mode. You can actually keep all your stuff, and you can transfer files over FTP or Samba and stuff over the network to your Xbox and stuff, so you don't have to like sneaker net it over there. It's pretty neat.
So you can kind of relive the PlayStation 3 days on your Xbox. That's kind of nice.
Yeah, I still have my PS3 homebrew, pretty awesome stuff.
I bricked mine. It was a sad day.
So I was going to comment on something, Adam, you said a little bit earlier about how you don't expect the youngins to want to get the old technology to work with modern displays and everything else.
No, I don't expect not just young people, but anybody to put the money and time into finding the right parts, getting the games, getting the scalers. There's plenty of people who do. I just don't expect people to.
Right.
I expect people to just get their quick fix in RetroArch or the Nintendo Switch Online bundles or a Sega collection or something like that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. The I have some original Commodore hardware, the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64. Then I have the C64, which is like the modern implementation with HDMI. Way easier to play games and everything else on that. But what I found interesting was my oldest, a little bit of a funny kid, he prefers to play the games on the original hardware. And I'm not sure why he's a purist. He didn't grow up with it. But he prefers that, even though it's more irritating to use the floppy drives or whatever. He's okay with using SD cards on them. But there's a frustration with that. But maybe there's maybe there's a charm in that in the old.
Yeah, it's about the experience, right? It's not like playing the game is definitely the majority of it, but having the original controller in your hands like makes a big, you play something like you was talking about RetroArch on the Xbox, right? Like playing a SNES game with an Xbox controller, while certainly doable, is not the same experience as playing a SNES game with the original controller. And like especially when you get like weird controllers, right? Like an N64 controller.
Yeah,
that thing is bizarre, right? And so like trying to emulate the N64 controller on something else just feels weird. But when you hold the N64 controller and the C buttons and the Z button on the back, and it feels right. So that's the biggest thing to me, is playing with the original controllers.
All right, I'm gonna have to stop you right there, Adam. The N64 controller never felt right. It was the worst piece of garbage controller ever made, and I cannot believe Nintendo ever released that N64 controller. It is the worst.
I love it.
I hate it. Like I honestly, I refuse to play.
You don't have 3 arms?
No.
So Adam, do you have bigger hands or something?
I have tiny hands, actually. I have like Donald Trump size hands. They're really small. But yeah, like no, I love that controller. It's awesome. It's unique. It's great. Like if everything else is just like everything these days is the same controller. And like
True.
I like that unique controller.
Okay, you like that.
Play something like GoldenEye with an Xbox controller, and it feels weird. Because like the C buttons mapped to the right stick doesn't feel right. But you play GoldenEye with that thing, and it feels just right. It feels correct.
This is not a good. I did not enjoy playing any games on Nintendo 64 with this controller. Like I didn't like back in the day. I thought this was a step backward from the Super NES controller.
That thumbstick is ahead of its time.
Well, I do like how it is. It's notched, so you can actually have the 8 different positions.
It's also an optical thumbstick, so it doesn't drift. Like you have a bunch of modern sticks that are based on potentiometers. Those things will drift. You give them like any amount of time. So like short amount of time, long, like they all end up
This is
drifting
based
at
on
some point.
optical.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, paint me green and call me
So
Gumby.
Adam is saying that the Nintendo 64 controller is better than the Switch controllers. You heard it here first.
Oh, the
Oh.
Joy-Cons are terrible.
Oh, those are
Yeah, they're
junk.
garbage.
The
They're
Joy-Cons are
horrible.
awful. The Joy-Cons are way worse than an N64 controller.
Well, what is worse than those controllers? Seriously, I've never.
What is, yeah.
The Switch has the worst controllers I've ever used, hands down, across the board.
The original Xbox, the Duke, that was a pretty terrible controller.
I think that one didn't that one just break a lot? I mean,
No, it's just huge. And there's some pretty cheap, like I think it was the original US Saturn pad was really terrible. That one would just like, it just felt cheap and would break, and just like
yeah,
the original
that's the one,
Saturn
okay.
pads were just
Yeah.
bad.
Oh, you have the Duke?
I think I don't know
Yeah.
if this is the Duke or not.
Let me see it.
How big is it?
No, that's the S
Oh.
controller.
Okay.
The
That's
Duke
a
had
nice
the black
one.
and white at the top right,
Yeah.
and it had the stupidest, the worst D-pad. I don't even know what they were thinking with that D-pad, but the Duke D-pad was like, it looked like like you got it new, and you're like, my D-pad looks like the plastic melted. It was just like weird shaped and just terrible. But yeah, the
It
Joy-Cons are
melts
pretty
in your
bad.
thumbs.
Right. See, the games were just so hot. They were just so intense that your D-pad just couldn't stand it.
I do know that there are
Yes.
replacement for the Steam Deck. The replacement they use magnetic sensors, like I forget what they're called, but like Halifax sensors or something like that.
Yeah, Hall sensors. Yeah.
Yeah, so that to replace these. I haven't had any drift issues with these, but if I do, I'll definitely do that upgrade.
Oh, another controller that's worse. Anything with Mad Cats on it, that's gonna be terrible too.
So,
Mad Cat's controllers were terrible. Mad
When-
Cat's memory cards, it was like if you got a memory card with Mad Cats, every time you powered on that machine, it was a roll of the dice as to whether or not your saves were still there.
when Nate was talking about how bad the Nintendo 64 controllers was, I couldn't help but imagine all the bad controllers that were third party for Nintendo 64. They made the Nintendo 64 controller look like it was like godly made.
There were some really bad ones, yeah.
That's pretty funny.
So what about controllers that are out there that don't they make what are our options for playing retro controllers on emulation? We have to have
RetroBit makes some pretty good Genesis pads. I think they actually use the original shells for theirs. You can get a pretty good 6-button. They have Bluetooth versions or a USB dongle with 2.4 gigahertz. You can get either of those. 8-Bit Dough makes some pretty decent ones, but their D-pads aren't super great. But who is that one?
This is an eBay special that I got for like $8, and
yeah,
actually it's not too bad. I think like the start and select are a little bit funny as far as how they feel. The rubber isn't right, if you know what I mean. Like it just doesn't have the right squish to it. But the D-pad and the buttons themselves, they're all fine.
Yeah.
And actually it works pretty good.
Also, a company called RAFnet, RAPHNET. I think they're still around. They make a lot of adapters for original controllers, so you can connect like your original controller to either a different system or to a PC. And so, if you have original controllers, maybe getting an adapter might be worth it. It's just a matter of, something like RetroArch, bringing it back to that, is very customizable in terms of like inputs and like button mappings and things like that. So like, yeah, getting an adapter with like an original controller can really make a difference too. If you want to play with the original N64 controller like a real person.
Yeah,
No, I don't.
RetroBit has this cool Street Fighter 2 controller. It's a 6-button USB dual link. It's I think it's Bluetooth and that's cool. And they make one that's since we're bagging on the N64, they make a Tribute 64 wired controller that instead of having 3, it's just 2, and it puts the D-pad in the middle of the controller because you hardly ever use it, but it's right there. I'm gonna have to get this Street Fighter 6-button. Actually, I have the fighter pad, the original Genesis fighter pad that has the turbo switches on it. 6-button with the big stick and ball and the switches. I should get an adapter for my computer. See if I can figure out how to play Soul Calibur with it. That'd be great.
The absolute god tier of controllers is the original Neo Geo stick.
Oh,
Because that thing has micro switches in it, and it's amazing.
don't even get me started on Neo Geo. I played the one time I played the Neo Geo that it was like the one that I forget what it was called. It looked like the Genesis, and it had Samurai Showdown, and it was like 3 Below out, and it was neck deep in snow, and I was hanging out with some Italian guy who had a jug of orange juice with vodka in it, and we just played that all night. It was hilarious, and I was like, I need one of these. I need this game.
They were so expensive. They were like $700 for the console. The AESs, they were like, and the cartridges were really big because they were just arcade PCBs that you put into a big cartridge slot.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
I love Neo Geo. They had such good stuff.
There is I can't recall what it's called offhand. Maybe somebody knows, but retro as an RMC, the Retro Cave guy. I don't know if anyone's ever watched him. Neil from RMC, the Cave. No longer Retro Man Cave. Anyway, he one of his advertisers is a arcade like stick thing where it has the arcade style buttons and a joystick and everything else. I've really thought a lot about getting one of those just for playing like the old arcade games, because there's something about like that slapping those buttons down and really yanking on that joystick. I don't know if anybody can relate at all about the arcade experience. Yeah, but like anyway,
boot up some Space Harrier and welcome to the fantasy zone and just have your fun, man.
I was thinking Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and The Simpsons myself. Those were 2 of the arcade games.
That was when Konami made real games.
Yeah. I laughed so much playing Simpsons. And then it was like early on you had all those 4-player cabinets, and then as time went on it became 2-player cabinets because, for whatever reason. And
I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, I think probably like maybe the cabinets broke or someone.
X-Men was really good.
Was it? I never played that one.
Yeah, that was really good. Turtles in Time, obviously, was a follow-up to the Ninja Turtles arcade.
Yeah, that's good stuff. All right, so we totally went off track on the whole RetroArch thing. So let's to bring it all back to RetroArch and kind of close it out, because I want to bring up Eric's topic on Ubuntu, if at all possible. I got also White Chocolate has something here I threw in as well. So I'd like to maybe wrap this up here. So RetroArch, would you say it's something that you'll keep on your system and toy around with from time to time?
Yes.
Yeah. So for sure from Scrapjaw. Swift, what about you? Is RetroArch something you would keep on your system?
I never installed it. I've never used it.
So that's a no.
I've only heard of it in heck.
Adam, RetroArch something you're that's gonna hang out?
I like the hardware, man. I'm gonna just stick with the hardware.
Okay, that's fair. You have an Atari 2600?
I did. I got rid of it. It's kind of hard to connect that to modern displays, even through a scaler, because they were like RF, kind of like weird connectors.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole of, just to play, Adventure as a square. So
I have one back here that I really want to put a composite out on there.
Yeah, that'd be rad.
I think so. Servan, do you think you'll continue to use RetroArch in any capacity?
Yep.
That's cool. Probably playing.
I was the one who suggested this topic, obviously. So I'm obviously like passionate about it. Like I had a Game Boy when I was young, but most of the games I played were on emulators. Again, I don't play normal computer games. I like the Nintendo stuff. So
yeah, I understand.
I played with them a lot, and this is a very standardized way to emulate stuff. So if you set up controller once, for the most part, it's minimal config for other stuff too. It's like it's like a uniform workflow for different emulation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what is the most appealing to me, is like the singular configs. You can just put stuff in like config/RetroArch. It's a folder where you can configure stuff, and you can handle, like if you have it, for example, you said you play with MGBA and other stuff, like each emulator has its own way of handling things, has its own files. So each time you play like emulator for a different device, it's like whole other workflow. You have to configure it separately.
Mhm.
But for this, like I play using my Xbox 360 controller, I need to configure it once, maybe once per core, but the menu and other like overall like GUI handling, I just need to configure it once, and then it's like a common workflow.
That's a good
Again,
point.
I think it'll help me when I again finish this game and move on to a next game with like Citra, and then I think I would have like a better, more things to say about it.
Yeah, I think on that, I want to say the one thing I don't like about RetroArch versus using like MGBA directly is there are some features you just can't do in RetroArch.
Yes.
Doesn't mean I'm not going to use it, but the thing like doing trades and such, like you can't link, even though there's NetPlay, I have not found a way to do trades between two different systems that are running RetroArch, like playing like the Pokemon games.
Okay.
But if
that's true. Like some like emulator hacks have like this linked features and but one thing I think which is good is like stability and usability across several devices. For example, I wanted to try just the Melon D. Instead of using the RetroArch, I just installed Melon DS using repos, try to run it. It just crashed. The same emulator is not working like normally, but it's working on RetroArch. So it's like, okay, maybe let's just go back to RetroArch and don't try other emulators. Because again, I run stuff on ARM, maybe it's not that stable. But RetroArch, like whatever is there, it's multi-architecture compatible. So for me, it's more appealing that, and also Jinda might have more to say about this because he's running a RetroPie, which is like a whole like distro based on RetroArch.
Right. Well, cool. I really agree that the unified experience, putting it all in one little bucket, it really takes a lot of the guesswork out of it, a lot of the confusion and such.
For example, like saving files, like I said, start plus select, go to that like menu and the save, like saving states and like simple stuff, like everything is the same. So back button is the same. So you can just configure it for different emulators. And if you have many controllers, you just need to configure it once. And also one more thing which I found was I initially started playing in my old drive. For example, last week I said I played in my old drive, but this week I shifted the system to the Pi. I just copied the config files, like from one system to another. It's just like copy the config folder. Lo and behold, no need to do anything. It works.
Yeah, that is nice. That's super nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
So that's the good thing about this. Like just copy your configs, back up your configs. You can use it across ARM, x64, whatever you want.
I think backing up the configs is very important because if you let your small child use your Steam Deck and they screw everything up, that is really irritating. But that's for another conversation for another time. Eric, what about you? Do you think RetroArch is something that you'll keep around, or do you not really have the time for that?
I do think that RetroArch could be something. I need it to be as absolute simple as possible for me to have something up and running that I can take a ROM or whatever, format of the file and just put that into, wherever folder it needs to go and then say click to play. And like, that's it. My problem is I don't have a controller or hardware to actually play these games. So that's part of the issue. I know you can do some keyboard, but it's not going to be the same for a lot of them. So there's room in my life at some point, I think, to sort of revisit some of this, but I don't know that it's going to be anytime soon. So, but I do agree with the sentiment of, there's value here, whether it's from an artistic standpoint or, or sentimental, nostalgic perspective, whatever that may be. And I'm glad that it exists and is apparently easy enough that you have 4 different ways to install it and have it working. So
yeah,
that's neat. Somebody definitely put a lot of care and attention into this because, I mean, even just looking at the website, like there's a ton of good information behind it, and so it shows there's a lot of motivated people to
A lot
be
of
doing
enthusiasm
this.
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Colin. Now you've had a chance maybe to toy around with it a little bit. Something you might continue to toy around with.
Still toying at the moment, but I'll try it a little bit, but I can't see myself keeping it on there for too much longer.
Okay.
Unless something works. And it's probably something I need to spend a lot of time on. I'm probably not willing to do that. We'll see if I can just crack a game open. You never know.
Yeah.
I found some games here. I think they're games. .nds .nds games, or I don't know.
I'm not sure about that.
These are Nintendo DS games.
Oh yeah, it could be NDS. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Try it. Anyway.
Well, I think
probably not. I probably won't keep it there. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you find something you like, that there's something that a nostalgic game that you used to play when you were younger, I don't know what you played in your youth if you did.
Space Invaders was mainly the only but all the games we played was my parents didn't have, they couldn't afford games. So, I used to do paper rounds and stuff like that and just get money and spend it all at the arcades.
Jinda, what do you think of RetroArch? Is it going to stick around? Is it going to get the boot?
No, it's going to stick around. I got a copy of it for my Raspberry Pi. I hate to say it, it's not for me on the PC too much because I think it's more fun on my Raspberry Pi because I could take it. Yeah. I could take it with me and go to a buddy's house or something and we can screw around with it.
Yeah.
But as a PC, playing the retro games, I got enough power to play any game I want. It doesn't seem like the point, but maybe it's me being goofy.
Could be. But I think it might be like an experience thing. There's the old games were on purpose-built hardware, and so playing something for purpose-built hardware on a general-purpose machine is probably less enjoyable. Although I will say I have enjoyed it on the laptop quite a bit because you can take it on the go. But that was before the Steam Deck. Now I kind of just play it on the Steam Deck. So I get it. Eris, did you do much by way of classic retro gaming?
I mainly played 2 homebrew games.
Okay.
And it was okay. I can see like the benefits of having like this kind of like a PlayStation or an Xbox screen, like the big screen, and you can just move around with it easily, getting different games. But I do miss the actual emulators. I think all the options you can get in the actual emulators.
Okay.
But I think I could find uses for it despite that.
All right. Well, cool. So, Mr. White Chocolate, what would you keep RetroArch around, or is it something that may not stick around on your system?
I would definitely keep it around.
Oh, cool.
Love the classic games.
Very cool. Yeah, it's worth keeping around, I think. And for me, yeah, I'm gonna keep it around. It's probably the game I play the most on the Steam Deck at this point, even though I have newer games that are way better, more graphically exciting. I actually find myself playing the old games, not the Commodore 64 games, but the console games, very much more so on RetroArch more than anything else. So basically this is a really, really expensive Sega Game Gear or Game Boy or something like that. So next week, it's a news flight night. So if you have any topics, you can suggest them on the Telegram group, Discord, Matrix, wherever you like. Send them to suggestions@linuxsaloon.com, and I can read them and throw them in there. I would like to hear, rather than me build the news stories or steal them from Michael from This Week in Linux, I can actually pull them from the masses. Now, I got an email from Mr. White Chocolate here this past week, and he wanted to talk about antiX. So antiX is a distribution. It's a pretty minimal distribution that's been around a while. We've tested a few times. It's very close related to MX Linux. It's part of the same group of people that work on it. And they have ad blocker turned on by default. Now, is that in the web browser or something else deeper in the operating system?
any web browser that you use on that platform, everything, all the ads are blocked by default, which I found interesting. Compared, you never run into that on any other distro.
So we wanted to kind of discuss that. Is that something that you think is a good thing, or do you think there's some negativity that could be intertwined with that?
I think it would be better if the user, you know what I mean, turns it on if they want it on, instead of having it on by default.
What do you think on that, Eric? Having an ad block enabled by default.
I think it's unexpected behavior. So anytime you're introducing something that the user doesn't expect, that can be an undesirable thing, simply because sometimes ad blockers aren't exactly seamless, and so pages will look weird or not function properly. Other sites will actually say, you can't view this site because you're using an ad blocker, please disable your ad blocker, that sort of thing. So I think by making that choice for someone, and then also doing it in a way that any browser you use behaves that way, is probably not the best way to handle it. I think maybe explaining what an ad blocker is and guiding someone towards that decision, making it easy for them to do that, that's probably the better way to do it. I mean, I'm a big believer in ad blockers, just because I think a lot of websites go way too far with advertising, personally. I mean, I think cubiclenate.com does a great job with their ads, but
that's AdSense, so they're the only ones that I actually, when I browse my website, I block my own ads.
Well, there you go. Anyway, so, and that's really what, if you've been using the internet and web browsers and going to websites long enough, early on, there was no problem with ads, because they were usually sold just simply by that website, and they were built into the design of the site. And as time went on in the early 2000s, ads became really problematic. And also because you were on a very slow connection, oftentimes ads made browsing that much slower. And so I can remember the first iterations of ad blockers being like miraculous, because they stripped the page of all of the things that were making it take so long to load. That's much less relevant in today's world. I would argue that ad blockers on mobile platforms are more important, because you have less space, and so it makes it easier to see the content without all that stuff in the way. But yeah, anytime, I mean, just my experience in the IT realm is that anytime you do something that changes the expected behavior of something without informing the user, it's going to lead to generally a bad, even if you're helping them, you're doing it in an altruistic manner, and you're trying to make it a better experience. If it deviates from what they're used to, a lot of times they think it's broken, or something's not right. So
yeah, I think that the necessity of blocking ads would not be present if ad agencies were just more respectful about their advertising.
Okay. Yeah.
Because there'd be no need to block the ads if they didn't just suck up bandwidth, run these intense JavaScript messes in the background. If they just didn't do that, that would be great.
Yeah, they're obnoxious and they're disrespectful.
Yep. So that's interesting, though. They have antiX has it enabled by default, but I think it makes sense for antiX, though. Probably would make sense for like a regular distribution. Not to say that antiX isn't regular, but it's kind of a purpose-built distribution that I would run like on a thumb drive for when I have to do specific tasks. So I think in many ways, it makes sense for antiX, but I don't think it makes sense necessarily for MX Linux. Would you agree to that, or not so much?
I think that, yeah, I mean, the antiX crowd is probably a step above, but still, I still think it's something that is a user's choice, and especially for someone who's using something like antiX, I would expect that, like you and like I think a lot of us, we have our own opinions on whether or not advertisements are a good thing. I'm happy to support certain websites, but if I was in a position where I couldn't even do that, I think I would probably be annoyed that I would have to either undo something that someone else. I generally don't like when decisions like that are made for me. Again, even if they're made with the best intentions. So
Yep. Oh, cool. We still have a little bit of time here. I want to bring up your Ubuntu challenge there, Mr. Eric Adams. Maybe the community.
I just didn't know
might...
if anyone had like a quick fix for this. It's just a dumb thing where I'm most likely going to nuke and pave this install anyway at some point. But in the meantime, I've been having this issue where when the system is locked or has been asleep and I'm like opening up my laptop or whatever, that login, and this is GNOME Ubuntu, like just regular Ubuntu, it takes a long time to unlock. So I put in my password, I hit enter, and it's thinking about it. And at a minimum, it's usually close to 10 seconds. And at a maximum, it'll either time out or it'll take like a good 20 to 30 seconds for the desktop to, it's actually sitting at the lock screen. So it's not like it gets past the lock screen and the desktop's like loading and there's something stuck. It's the actual authentication piece itself that just seems like it's sticking and sitting, thinking about it, sometimes timing out, always taking at least 10 seconds though. So just didn't know if someone had encountered that and had, like, oh yeah, you just go and do this thing. So
the closest thing I can say I've ever had to that was when I was running SDDM on my old, very 2010 netbooks. The netbook's already pretty underpowered, and then being that old with 2 gig of RAM, it would hang, like SDDM would just hang, and then I couldn't do anything, and then until like everything kind of came in. So I'd use LightDM instead, but and that kind of fixed that problem. But I don't know if maybe, do you think so? But you said when you lock your screen though, not just logging in, it's just like when you lock it.
Correct. It's not whenever when I reboot and that first initial authentication to GDM, it's normal. It just logs in. It takes, a second, 2 seconds, whatever. And then, the desktop's loading and apps will start launching and all that. It's when it's been running and it either locks itself after the lock timeout or after I have closed and then reopen the lid.
Yeah, I wonder, have you checked like the kernel messages to see if anything's going on there?
I've been very lazy about it.
Okay. So
yeah.
I've had a few times when, and this is totally unrelated, but I'm just, in my mind, I'm thinking, so I've had on some machines, not all of them, so it's not universal, but on some machines, specifically like my older Dell Latitude, that if it goes into hibernate and then comes back, it has like random current, like the kernel like has like issues with like some of the CPU cores don't spin back up or something like that, or they can't get locked in or whatever. And so the system hesitates a lot. I wonder if something, I mean, that's probably not what it is. It would make sense. It sounds like, is it GNOME or, because you're a GNOME?
It's GNOME, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's probably something with GDM or whatever, credentials. It's fine. I'm almost certainly going to just get rid of this, but I just wasn't sure if someone, again, oh yeah, I had this problem last week. You never know. It's worth asking, right?
What version of Ubuntu is this?
2004 at this point. No, 2204. Sorry, 2204. I haven't upgraded yet, and I'm probably not going to. It's time for a change. I've been running this install for honestly, and I've upgraded numerous times, and honestly, for lack of having the motivation to reinstall things and get it all set up the way I want, I've just been kind of lazy about it. So at this point, though, I'm ready to try. I'm dual booting with Mint, and I haven't even upgraded Mint to the new to 21. I've been very lazy at computing recently.
I understand. Yeah, I don't know. That's a good one. That's a good mystery. If you do find out,
it's probably worth looking at the messages, like you said. I'm sure it would tell me, that is the nice thing about Linux is that usually if you really want to find the answer, you can look at the, logs directory, and that there's something in there somewhere that you'll be able to find out most of the time.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you can figure that out or at least solve the problem, because I know that I find that if a system like hangs on me or if it just misbehaves, I pretty much I find it, I have no patience for it on Linux. Like I have patience for it on Windows or Mac. even Android to some degree. But
Yeah.
if my Linux system ever hangs on me or does something that is not what I would expect to do, I kind of like I become rather heated. Actually, I become very frustrated because you are not permitted to do this. This is outside of
Right.
your charter. You are misbehaving. So at least that's
I
how I
understand.
feel.
No, I understand. And honestly, most of the time, at least, I would have normally in the past certainly not let this stand. And it would have actually been something fun to chase down and figure out. And then I probably would have made a video about it. And like, I'm not there anymore right now, at least. So
Right.
I'm going to ask someone else for help instead of figuring it out myself.
Right. No, I get it. And that, sometimes you just got to be there. I know I recently had some troubles with audio and tumbleweed, and so I just immediately submitted a bug report. I just didn't, and because I had to roll back and then use another. I had to roll back and then use another kernel, and then when I was asked to do certain things for information, all of a sudden it started working again. Like kernel 6.0.5 was like it wouldn't play audio out of my internal speakers, only out of everything else.
Oh, jeez.
So and then I couldn't figure out why. I messed with it. I rebooted it and did all these things. And so I filed a bug report. I rolled it back, and I kind of just put like basically the kernel information, like the D messages.
Mm-hmm.
And then they said, "Can you do this? Run this on that." And so I went back to that snapshot, and then it was working. And so I couldn't actually figure out what was wrong with it, even though I banged my head against the wall. So, but like to me, I'm expecting my system to operate in a certain way every day because that's how it operates.
Mm-hmm.
And when it does things that are outside of the norm, I have almost no patience for it. Like I literally because you don't do this, so you are not permitted to do this now.
The problem for me though is if I let that motivate me too much, then I end up not getting done the things that I intended to do. I'm very much more purposeful now. Like I'll get in front of the computer to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, if something like that came up and bothered me, like I'd just go off on a tangent and I would fix it and then come back to, whatever I was trying to get done. But of course, that's when I'd be able to sit at a computer for 12 hours a day. And like, I just don't have that stamina anymore. So the couple good hours of computing I get, like I need to just sit down and get things done, which is why a lot of the things that I would have normally like been very meticulous about anymore, it's just like, it's not that important. Or I'm not going to take the bait. Like I'm not going to go down this path and spend 2 hours, like at the end of it, having fixed a small thing that annoyed me, but ultimately not having gotten done anything that I needed to do. So,
right. Yeah. And there was once upon a time for me also, like if I had problems with Linux, I would just go and figure out what it was, fix the problem, maybe write about it or put it in a forum or something like that. But because now the problems are so infrequent, when they do happen, I just get very upset because I have to do things with my computer. Like I don't just, I know Linux is for people who like to mess with their computers, as someone once so eloquently put it. But I think but at this point, like, yes, that was true. And I still like to mess with my computer. Most of the time I have to get actual work done. And if I can't get that work done, I get just really super frustrated.
Yeah. Yep. First and foremost, right? Get the thing done you have to do. Then you can play around if you have the time to do it.
Right.
Sounds like I'm talking to my kid.
Yeah, you are, essentially. All right. Okay, so next week we are doing News Flight once again. So if you have any news suggestions, send them to suggestions@linuxsaloon.com or put them in any of the forums or social media-ish things. What do we do? The chat stuff. The chat things the kids using these days. We need an IRC room. I think we need an IRC room just because. All right, and also just a quick reminder too that there's a time change happening in U.S. Eastern as of like tomorrow. So I think next week, for those that are in another country, it's probably going to mess up things. So I apologize, but I had nothing to do with it. And if it was on the ballot this last election cycle, I would have voted against it. But it wasn't on the ballot, so I did not vote against it.
We're still going to blame you, Nate.
Okay, you can blame me. That's fine. I'll check on the times and such and so forth before next week, sure, at some point.
So
All
what
right.
are you guys doing? Putting your clocks forward or back, or
We're falling
They're
back.
going back.
Back, yeah. Spring
we're gonna
forward,
start-
fall back.
We're gonna start Linux Saloon 1 hour earlier for everybody else.
right?
If
Oh,
that,
okay.
if that messes you up, I apologize. I'll send a strongly worded letter to my representative in your name, Colin.
That's right, Colin. It annoys us too.
Yeah, but it gives us something to complain about twice a year. So there is that. Keeps us distracted.
Yeah.
Keeps us distracted from the real issues out there. All right, so Mark isn't here this week, but he has the Atlanta Linux Enthusiast Group. They meet every Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern. Except for tomorrow, it might screw you up if you're in another part of the world. So sorry about that. 3 p.m. Eastern, whatever that works out to in your time zone. I think Destination Linux is streaming live tomorrow. I don't know. I think Michael is traveling right now, so maybe they're not. So I don't know. Check it out. They might be going at 1 p.m. Eastern, but again, that time change, it might mess you up. Linux User Space is releasing a new episode on Monday. It's their Kali Linux episode, drops Monday. So, as Leo said, bust out your hoodies. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it made me laugh. So bust out your hoodies for Kali Linux. There we go. Scrapjaw's way ahead of us. I didn't wear my hoodie today.
It's not black, but it's a hoodie. It's all I had.
All right. I can't say it as cool as Leo because he has a certain way he says things that sounds way cooler than me.
Hacker vibes.
It is. So I'm part of a podcast called Linux Out Loud. This last week, we talked about passwords and password security. It comes out this Wednesday. You can go to cubicle8.com if you want to find out about more things that I do. And sometimes I do things, sometimes. Linux Saloon is part of the Tux Digital Network. Check out more great shows at tuxdigital.com. I want to thank you all for being a part of this conversation in both the Zoom meeting here and in the YouTube stream or the Twitch stream, because that's also running, I guess. As well as everyone for watching the show after the fact. I want to thank everyone involved in making the Linux and open source tools possible for us to not only have this conversation, but also to have fun and enjoy our technology. Linux truly puts personal back into personal computer. Thank you for stopping by. Be sure to tip your developers, and please remember to Linux responsibly. Until next time, see yas.
Bye.
Bye.
Adios, amigos.
Bye. Good seeing you guys. Good conversation.
All right, so
Yeah,
on
I've-
what?
No, go ahead.
Okay,
Continue.
Oh, it's wrong in the show notes. But well, I see a new face
Just
or a shadow of a face. I think Anor. Is that how you say your name? Welcome to the Linux Saloon. Have you installed RetroArch yourself?
I think he's still connected to audio.
Oh. Hopefully he finds it. Well, he didn't like us. It's all right. I'd have turned me off too. Sorry, say again?
A VPN is your best friend.
Yeah, it's a great game.
That was it.
So is there anything else there?
Nope.
No. Not someone's archive behind.
Oh, something's wrong with your audio. All of a sudden, like, it went crazy. You sound like overdriven. Like, super overdriven.
I don't know why my system likes to randomly change microphones.
Oh.
I did nothing. I didn't
It sounds
change or
beautiful
do
now.
anything. Yeah, it's because it's coming through here. Before, randomly, it just decided it was going to use my internal microphone on my laptop.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
really confusing. I've been living with this install of Ubuntu for, I don't know, almost 2 years probably, and it's time to go. It's just, it's got enough cruft and weirdness and things that I have no interest in looking at. Anyway,
And
You going to get some picnic baskets? Hey.
hey, boo boo.
Hey, boo-boo.
Hey.
Hey, boo-boo.
So if you go to
Gee, Yogi, that's a long trip from Michigan.
camp,